Hey there, www.andrewmarkmusic.com, and this is the third video and the last video on Eric Dubé's spiritual Stockholm syndrome. I was going to do it chapter by chapter, but I just found I agree with most everything he's saying, so that would be redundant to me. I'm just going to focus on the one area of contention I have, which is the specific school of Christian gnosis that he promoted, which asserts that it was Jesus as Lucifer as a serpent at the Garden of Eden, which I just find really problematic, and I'll get into it. But first, a little bit of background on me. I first read the Egyptian and Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Deadheads, about 20 years ago, so I'm familiar with them. It's not like I'm ignorant of what he's putting out there here. I've been meditating as an amateur meditator for 25 years, so this is an informal discussion. I have experienced that gap, what's called samadhi. I've even occasionally touched the bliss, the purush, the pleroma, the supreme eternal happiness. So it is what it is as far as my experience goes. I'm not claiming anything about anything other than I have my beliefs about things. I have my interior gnosis. I think it's worth touching or mentioning here Osho, who I think had a lot of things right, and in my opinion, what he did is he just went right back to the roots of the Vedas and referenced Samkhya with Prakriti, and he said that Prakriti, the material universe, is eternal, and don't bother with creation myths, just like the Buddha said don't bother, because it just creates an infinite regress, and just keep it simple and just say Prakriti, and that's all we know, and perhaps it's eternal, but in my view it goes through cycles of destruction and reconstruction. So that's my view on Prakriti, and then Purush is separate. It supervenes on Prakriti. It's not correct in Samkhya to call it God, but it is a supernal state of bliss consciousness. In my view, it's not incorrect to call it God consciousness, but I'm a bit of a troublemaker. There's a lot of syncretism as a Christian Gnostic. I'm not a fan of syncretism per se, but I think there's a lot of syncretism between Samkhya, the Purush, and the Christian Pleroma, and Prakriti and the Christian Kanoma, the material universe. I think there's a lot of overlap there, and I think it's valid to sort of do comparisons there. Okay, let's get into it. That's just a preamble. So he cherry-picked one school of Christian gnosis, which is quite a popular view that the serpent was the Jesus enlightening Adam and Eve. That school could be true, but I'm going to point out why I think it's problematic and why I don't subscribe to it. And there are many, many different schools of Christian Gnosticism, and many schools of esoteric spirituality. So I think it's honesty dictates that we should frame what we believe, the camp we sit in, and say, okay, this is such and such a school that I'm putting forward there, and then I have no problem about it. But it becomes overreach when you take a camp, a school, and say definitively this is the truth and everybody else is wrong. So there's many Gnostic schools, including, Gnostic schools that have nothing to do with Christianity, like the Hermeticists. I've got notes here. I'm just going to reference them here, so I want to get this accurate. The first thing that comes to mind here, where I think is problematic, is historically the demiurge, the architect of this construct, was depicted as part serpent and part lion, and right there, you should see the problem with his view that if this depiction is accurate, then it was Yaldabaoth who was playing both roles, Samael Lilith, according to the Hebrews, right? So that alone, it causes a big red flag within me. In my opinion, they both lied. Adam and Eve became less like gods. This knowledge of duality and the knowledge of good and evil didn't make them more godly, in my view. It made them less godly. That's just my opinion on it. I think if you look at the writings of the New Testament, this Jewish Jesus rabbi, which means Yahweh saves, by the way. So that right there, he's telling you he's archontic, right? And he references Venus. He says that he is the bright morning star, which is Venus, which is Lucifer. So he's admitting to being an archon of Venus here. And it's not the only archon within Christian gnosis. There's the Saturnian archon, Father Time, Kronos, the Eater of Children, which is the reference to the reincarnation loose matrix that David Icke talks about. And then there's the lunar associations of this matrix, where the earliest iteration of Yah, I-A-O, is from Egypt. This Yaldabaoth was the Egyptian moon god in Egypt. And this obviously ties in to the story of Osiris, which is basically a narrative about the moon. And the slicing of 14 pieces is the waning moon, and then put back together. You have the waxing moon to become whole again. So it's basically, lunar allegory, and a part of that allegory involves Thoth, who weighs the scales of justice in the afterlife, apparently on the moon. So all of this is referencing archons. Now Thoth is very interesting, because if you're looking for the story of King David, you can find him in Thutmose III. The life story of Thutmose III is what's written about King David in the Torah. So you can see that Thutmose III, which means son of Thoth, is really the template for the King David story. So he's Egyptian pharaoh, as was Solomon, sun and moon, was Amenhotep III. Again, this is all Egyptian. The roots of this is all Egyptian. See my blog, Judaism as Egyptian Spirituality. So, this makes Jesus Thoth, and there's people like Dan Winter who promote this view, that the Jesus character was Thoth. Now, I have a problem with it because, again, it's referencing, the reference are all planetary, and that's archontic from my Christian Gnostic school. This is referencing planetary archons, and it's got nothing to do with the aeons of the Pleroma, who would not have any associations with the planetary archons. The Christ of the Pleroma would not want to be represented by Venus. Okay, this is a replicant Jesus. So there were two Christs. There's the Yaldabaoth replicant as Christ, generally known as Samael Lilith, and then there's the true aeon of truth and wisdom, which is pleromic, and they remain hidden. Now, the other problem I have with this Jesus as Lucifer is anybody who's done a thorough investigation of Freemasonry knows that the pinnacle there at the top of the pyramid is Lucifer. So this is who they're paying homage to. And with Freemasonry, we understand that it's Hebrew occultism, and it was the Freemasons who brought about capitalism and usury and predatory economics. And if people think this is from the aeons of the Paroma, they're really confused. There's a deep confusion going on here about the role of Freemasonry, if you believe that they're the white hats, which I do not. All of this is happening within this canonic system ruled by the archon, the planetary archons, with the primary one being the Saturnian law, the eater of children, a reference to the Lush farm. I also wanted to mention about the story of Set, and Set comes from that Venus aspect of Venus in the night sky, where it becomes a part of a more spooky narrative about Lucifer. So in the morning it's a bright morning star and it heralds the rising of the sun, so it's a light bringer. And at nighttime, this Lucifer figure gets associated with sunset, and Set was the Hebrew Hyksos adopted Set as their primary god, and the Egyptians in Alexandria 2,000 years ago associated that adoption with Satan. So there's two Christs. There's the Pleromic Christ and the replicant Yaldabaoth Jewish Jesus, who wants to bring in the third temple and fulfill all the Saturnian law magic. I wanted to point out something that I think is more coherent about where the Roman Church got their devil story from, and I think it comes from the fall of Sophia. So when Sophia fell into matter, this is what the Roman Church did. They took that story and turned Sophia into the devil. So the mother of the architect Demiurge, they turned into the devil. And I think this is just makes more sense to me. So I'll leave that at that. Take that for what you will. Let's touch on amnesia now. I think that, any kind of good God, if this was a school, would give everybody some 10% of memory upon consciousness arising in newborns. The fact that it's basically almost a total memory wipe, I got to go with the Schopenhauer camp. This place is penitentiary from that specific point of view. I also want to finish up here with some thoughts on reason and logic and their proper place. They are aspects of Prakriti. They're on the Kanoma side of the street. They're not from the Paroma. They're evolutionary. As mammals within the material universe develop complex brains, we develop the faculties of reason and logic. Immanuel Kant was the foremost expert on studying reason and logic, and he made it clear that they have their limitations. They can help us within the inquiries within phenomenon, but they can't get us, reason and logic can't get us to the thing in itself, the noumenon, which I call Parush, Pleroma. So they're useful. Reason and logic is useful, but they have their limitations. Where I personally sit on that is something can be true spiritually, but it can't be true spiritually if it's inherently irrational and if it's inherently illogical. Like, you can't be an all good God and commit murder and genocide and demand murder and genocide. It's just, that's not a paradox. A paradox is being awake when you're asleep. That's a paradox. That committing genocide when you're claiming to be all good is just a blatant contradiction. So most of the Torah is irrational, and gluing the New Testament onto the Torah is just piling irrationality on top of irrationality. And this is why the Jews don't like the New Testament anyway, because they see the contradictions. And what should have been stapled onto the New Testament was the writings of Plato. Another video that one is. And I'll finish up here with a channel called The Majesty of Reason. I think his name's Joe Schmidt. And he just did a recent 2.5-hour video on all the different theories about duality within the study of science and consciousness. And basically, the takeaway there is not very much of it has been resolved in any definitive way. Perfectly fine if one wants to sit in a certain camp, like I sit now in the dual aspect monism camp within the hard problem of consciousness, but I remain a dualist because I believe there is Purush Pleroma. So metaphysically, or what you could say is physically I'm a monist, but metaphysically I'm still a dualist. So there's useful tools we have to try and suss things out, but they're limited in what we can actually know about ultimate reality as far as our investigative methods within the Kenoma. And I'll finish up here by saying that I subscribe to this more of a Sethian Christian Gnostic view from a modern point of view, and all of this has its roots in Egypt, which isn't to say that Zoroastrianism didn't impact certain schools of gnosis. It clearly did, but the primary stories associated with the Torah, Christianity, all come from Egypt. The Torah is Egyptian spirituality. You see my blog on Judaism as Egyptian spirituality. So this makes the Jesus character Thoth. You're going to have to just make that call on your own, what you think of him. So yeah, Seth is definitely an interesting character within this cosmology. I won't get into it here. It's just I want to wrap this up. I think I said most everything I wanted to say, and for the most part I agree with everything he's saying. I'm just making really issue with the one school that he's cherry-picked and laying out the reasons why I think he's incorrect, and I think that teaching is incorrect from my Christian Gnostic point of view, which is obviously mediated by modernity. Like, I'm not in Alexandria 2,000 years ago. I'm in British Columbia 2,000 years later trying to unpack all of this. So, yeah, we'll leave it at that. Well worth the time listening to his book. And there's my deconstruction, criticism of his primary points about Christian gnosis. That's it. Ciao.